I want to convey some actual meaning and hopefully some things that actually help improve the world. I think if you're getting up on stage and demanding everybody else be quiet while you talk and then not saying anything, I think you're really doing yourself and the rest of humanity a big disservice.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Innersleeve on the SoundMojo podcast network, the podcast taking a deep dive inside look at all things music. I'm your host, Cassius Morris, and we're joined today by yet another very special guest via Zoom, Mobley. How you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Hey, thanks for coming on, my man. So much going on with you. So I was just checking out the live video for the recent single that you have, James Crow. Really fascinating video. I mean, we're looking at 4 different screens, so many different visuals. If you could, talk to me about what went into that video and the way that it was presented.
Yeah, so it both more and less than it probably looks like went into it, but I have a couple video guys that I work with closely on all my visuals. I direct everything, but they'll handle camera and direction of photography and all that. So I had those 2 guys and then my tour manager, and we set up my whole show up there, and then set up a few cameras and took a drone and then shot this hour-long show, half-hour-long show that's going to be part of what I'm calling a virtual tour. So I'm going to be doing 9 of these different shows in various locations. We shot one last weekend at the actually under construction Austin FC stadium here.
Nice.
We're getting a new MLS team here.
Okay.
And we're shooting out at Circuit of the Americas, the Central Library, going down to the Gulf Coast, just a bunch of really cool locations to kind of replace that live touring experience that we can't do this year with something a little more exciting than just me sitting in this room, like playing guitar into a webcam.
Right. And I mean, that was going to be my next question about, where the virtual tour was actually going to take place. So it is taking place in different locations. Was that really important to you when coming up with this, that it wasn't just the same basic live concert you would expect? Yeah.
I mean, it's not a knock on those things at all, but it's very boring to me
right.
to be kind of either on my couch or in this chair with a camera here, playing stripped down acoustic versions of my songs. It just doesn't, I really put a lot into my live show. And it doesn't capture that scale, and it's not transportive in that same way. So we really went to great lengths to find a way to safely shoot something a little bit more exciting than that. And the goal, kind of the artistic goal, is to go into all these places, because all these places are public or semi-public places where people gather,
Right.
A hotel is ideally full of people. A stadium is ideally full of people. Library is ideally full of people. And so go to these places that are kind of symbols of that kind of social interaction that we don't have right now, and kind of explore them in their current barren state, to kind of mourn the isolation that we're experiencing right now, but then also look hopefully toward a time, hopefully in the not too distant future, where we're back in those spaces interacting with each other again.
That's really interesting. So, I mean, what's it like when you're in a stadium like that that's under construction and you are reflecting on that? What sorts of emotions are coming up?
On the one hand, it's just cool, like getting to be in a space like that, kind of getting to take it over and have your whole show. Like, that's something that I wouldn't be able to do without the pandemic. Like I'm definitely not filling stadiums at this point.
Hey, soon enough.
Well, thank you. But the other part is definitely, there's definitely some sadness and some just creepiness, like it's people with a stadium, with a huge library like our central library with Circuit of the Americas, like thousands and thousands of people put thousands and thousands of hours into constructing, designing, maintaining this space with the idea, I'm going to do all this work and then just millions and millions of people are going to get something out of it. And now all that work is just not just temporarily, all that work is for nothing. Like it's just sitting there. And so when you're in these massive spaces alone, you feel the weight of that. And it's just for me, it's a different angle on everything that's happening right now. It really makes me appreciate, I'm somebody who's kind of, when I'm not on stage, I'm pretty introverted. I kind of like to keep it to myself. I only really hang out with my family. Okay. But it's making me realize how much I took for granted just being around people, you know?
Just everyday sort of interactions.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I've realized that too. I mean, even the odd time I go to the store or experience something that feels sort of normal, it's like, or, you know, for example, watching Uber videos of Uber cams of maybe a good video, it's like, you know, those people probably just thought they were going out that night and took it for granted, but now it's taken from us, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a very strange thing. Your background is in filmmaking, is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. I studied film in school.
Talk to me about the relationship between film and music, because as I start to learn a little bit about film, I'm realizing they're so intertwined. It's such a crucial element of it.
For me, film was like a thing I was really interested in. When I was deciding what to study, I was already really into music, but I didn't want to study music formally because my process is really naive. Like I'm not applying a lot of technical thinking to what I'm doing in terms of like theory and all those things. So I wanted to keep that like naive way of writing music. But I really love film. And actually the original thing I thought I was going to do with my life when I was a kid, I thought I would be an animator. And so I studied film, animation, and kind of took that as an opportunity to spend some time learning that stuff. You know, in terms of the relationship between the two, on the film side, like music is basically inextricable. When a film doesn't have music, it's a big deal. Like it's a news story that a film came out and didn't have any music in it, because it's such a part of that the kind of meta language of film. What's happening in the music gives us all kinds of emotional cues about what's happening on the screen, whether that's something that's about to happen, something that has happened.
Right.
That, you know, you see the hero on the screen and you hear the hero's theme come up and you associate, like with Star Wars, when you hear that, right, the notes from when he's on Tatooine looking up at the, like that takes you there.
It's even a huge part of that feeling.
More than the image. Yeah, it's a huge part.
Yeah.
And then on the flip side, for me, especially, you know, as, you know, and I'm sure you appreciate this as somebody who works in internet video, but especially with the kind of decline of cable and all that and the rise of internet video. Yeah. It's really important to have a visual component with your music to make it shareable and to help it penetrate those spaces where it's about the visual. And so, right. You know, it's an extra burden that musicians have to deal with, but on the flip side, it's an extra opportunity for expression. And so for me, given my love of film and my background in film, I really try to lean into it and make sure that there is a visual world that accompanies the sonic world that I'm creating on my records.
Yes, that's super interesting, you know, and it actually makes me wonder. You talked about, you know, a film having no music, it would have a news story. Even a film that has different sort of music has had news stories. Like, you know, what are your thoughts on films, for example, that are period pieces set way back that have current modern music in them? Does that throw you off?
So the only one I can think of off the top of my head, I know I've seen a bunch to do this, but the first one that comes to mind is the Great Gatsby, the Baz Luhrmann one that had like Jay-Z and all that on it. Right.
And Django Unchained comes to mind for me also.
Oh yeah. That's right.
For a recent one.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I think it can certainly be cool. I definitely don't have any issue with it. But I do think that it really comes down to emotion, because, like, even with a lot of period films that are using quote unquote period music, they're less using period music and more using music that we associate with that period. You know what I mean?
That's true. It could be recorded maybe at a different time even, but it sounds like it's reminiscent of the period. Right.
Right. And so I think as long as what you're doing is evoking the right emotions. I didn't love that Great Gatsby film, but honestly, like, the music didn't distract me. The music hit the emotional notes that it needed to hit for the story for me, that it worked,
Right. I've actually yet to see that film. I know I'm very late, but I've yet to see it.
Yeah.
So maybe eventually. What are some, if you can think of any off the top of your head, of favorite scores in films? I know you mentioned Star Wars.
Oh yeah, Star Wars is just great. Yeah, Star Wars is like, I think there's a phenomenon with art where there's a level that art can only achieve when it's extremely popular, and it's great if it's good, and I'm not knocking Star Wars as being good, but there's a way that hearing Star Wars connects me to other people that is impossible, regardless of how good it is, without it being popular. So that's kind of like a whole different kind of appeal that is
commonality.
It's based on us all having it as a point of reference. John Williams stuff is just great. I think There Will Be Blood comes to mind. I think Johnny Greenwood did the score for that. I really like that. John Bryan did the score for Punch Drunk Love, which is another P.T. Anderson film. Really underrated film. I think it's really good, but the score is really cool. My favorite part, he takes a song from the Popeye musical. Did you ever see the Robin Williams Popeye musical? Okay.
I didn't see it.
It's not great, but it's fun. But he takes a song from that and, like, kind of puts it over new chords to make it to give it this kind of creepy feeling. It's Punch Drunk Love is Adam Sandler, like, he's not being comedic. It's a funny movie, but he's playing the role straight. And the score is a huge part of, like, understanding the psychology of his character and the emotional state of his character. It's a really kind of unconventional score in a lot of places. Lots of, like, found sounds and unconventional percussion.
Different stuff.
That's probably my favorite film score, actually.
That's really cool. No, that I got to check that out, actually. Movie. That sounds like it. I mean, I think of, for offbeat weird scores, I think of, like, True Romance, that song that keeps playing throughout the movie and stuff. Yeah. I mean, it is insane how essential the relationship is between the two. So what film school did you go to? I
studied, it wasn't technically a film school. They have a film program at the school, but I studied film at Duke.
Okay. In Texas?
In North Carolina.
North Carolina, gotcha. Sorry, I've spent very little time in any of those regions. I'm out here in Canada, so trying to keep up. So what made you switch from film as your main passion to music, or is film maybe still one of your main passions?
I always say that music is my main love, but I have flings with film between records, because when the record's done, that's when you have to make the films. So music was always the plan. I started writing songs really early on in college and got obsessed with it and knew that that's what I wanted to do with my life. And so I basically had to decide whether to drop out or to find something that I felt like was worth sticking around for. Right. I was at school on scholarship, so it was like, well, somebody else has already paid for this, I might as well stick it out. Film was something that I didn't. I always had a passion for, but I didn't. When I went into college, I did not think I was going to be a professional artist. I didn't even really think of that as a real thing. That
really
that was
in general, or just as from music.
for music in particular, but like obviously I knew that there were professional musicians, but it seems so impossible when you're just like a kid and you don't know anybody who does it for a living. Everybody does normal stuff for a living. So but then when I started writing music, it was just like, oh, I'm obsessed with this. Like I have to find a way to make this work. And so film was kind of my way of turning college into something that was bearable for me.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And so, yeah, that's what I really dove into that. And, early on in my career, before I was able to do music full time, I was able to use those skills to kind of make a living. I did web design and then just lots of production work on video stuff to pay the bills before music paid the bills.
Very cool. So when did music start paying the bills, and what was the big shift that sort of pushed you off that ledge, so to speak?
So, I was making okay money. I mean, music paying the bills means like I get paid like a first year teacher. Like, so I'm not like living,
but you're still surviving, that's the goal.
Exactly. I had a band, and the band was 4 people, and then it was 3 people. Eventually it was just 2 of us. It was me and a drummer, and we had booked this long tour. The plan was to be gone for like 2 or 3 months. And my drummer ended up getting injured and wasn't going to be able to make the tour. And so I had to decide either to pull out of the tour, to play the tour acoustic, or to come up with some way of doing my full show just with one person.
Man.
And so I had like 2 weeks to come up with something. So I bought a drum kit. I reprogrammed my whole show, made it so that I could do some looping and switching between instruments to make it all work.
Wow.
And then went out and did that show. And the response to it was just, and it was the same songs I've been doing, but I think just doing something new, the response to it was really big.
Right.
And then B, just the financial reality of not having to split the money anymore, made it so that I could afford to do it full time. And so ever since then, I've been doing it solo full time.
What a set of circumstances. I mean, your band members are sort of dropping off like flies. I mean, do you feel like that was sort of meant to be in a way? I mean, what was that about?
Yeah, I mean, it was just, typical band stuff that happens. One guy got married, another guy wanted to go back to school. Just normal life stuff. But yeah, I mean, looking back, I never would have just like gone solo because I wanted to go solo. I always thought of myself as being somebody who was in a band, but then, now having done this, far back, even earlier in the band days, I was doing most, if not all, of the recording alone. And I was writing the songs. So I kind of already had those tools.
You had a lot of it mapped out.
Yeah. But I just never kind of put 2 and 2 together of like, this could work, me doing it alone. But yeah, now it seems, like you said, it seems like fate, because it's such a good fit for my personality. It's such a good fit for, the kinds of things that I'm interested in pulling off on stage. So,
right.
I there's certainly ways in which I miss having a band, and I think eventually I'll do some shows. Like I've done a couple one-off shows with a band just for the fun of it.
You still enjoy it sometimes.
Oh yeah. It's just 2 different things. There are things I can do on stage alone that I can't do with even one other person up there, and there are things that I can do with a band that I can't do alone. So it's just different flavors,
Yeah, it's sort of like 2 different helmets or hats, so to speak. I mean, but it's sort of under the same umbrella kind of thing.
Yeah.
A lot of clothing and accessory references, but I'm trying to drive at the main point here.
Yeah.
So the EP, February 19th, Young and Dying in the Occident Supreme. Am I saying that right?
Occident, yeah.
In the Occident Supreme. Tell me about that title.
I wrote most of the record while I was out of the country, actually. I was touring in Australia. I had a little bit of time off. I hadn't really taken a vacation in a really long time. And so it was just like, well, I'm over here. I don't know when I'm going to be able to afford to get back to this part of the world. So I went over to Thailand and hung out there for a while. And the plan was to not play any music at all. But the first day I was there, I walked by this music shop and they had a Telecaster, a knockoff Telecaster, which is a guitar that I'd always kind of wondered about and wanted to try. And it was only like $50 or something like that. So I was like, oh, I'll grab this. I'll just fool around on it while I'm here, and then I'll give it away before I leave. And so I got that. We went to this remote island, and we're just hanging out on the beach every day with this guitar. And then all of a sudden, all these songs started coming. And so I ended up writing and tracking most of the guitar for the record there, like on the coffee table of this apartment in Thailand. And the themes of the record, this was really early on in the Trump administration. And so the big story in the news was family separations. And I live in Texas, so that's my backyard where all that stuff is happening.
Yeah.
And I've got lots of friends who are immigrants from Mexico. It's just, even if I didn't have those connections, it would have been really upsetting, but I have personal connections to people in that place. And so it hits
close to home.
Yeah. It just hits super close to home.
Yeah.
And so it had been really frustrating being here and hearing the ways that people were kind of tiptoeing around it, because, here in the States, like there are all these political corporate entanglements where, you don't want to offend the supporters of this person and blah, 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 blah.
Right. Those are our donors.
Right. Exactly. But then, being over there, it was just like the United States is committing human rights abuses at its southern border, and they would just say it. And something about that clarity, that moral clarity, was really inspiring to me. And so I started writing about that and about lots of other things. And so the title comes from a poem that I wrote that a friend of mine who's a Mexican immigrant reads at the beginning of the record. And so, young and dying in the Occident supreme, Occident just means West. And I was thinking about the ways in which the West, which, we conventionally think of as like Western Europe and the United States, and then, to some degree also Australia, New Zealand, basically countries that are filled with white Europeans or were colonized by white Europeans.
Even Canada, I think, could be thrown in there for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. Canada for sure. There's this way that we talk about kind of the cultural and historical heritage of the West as being this supreme great thing. And then other places, the story is that they don't dominate politics, economics, global culture, all those things, because there's this cultural inferiority, and the cultural superiority of the West is why basically white European people have come to dominate the world. And being somewhere else, like I, of course, know that's not true, but when you are just immersed in a culture and in a society where we act like that's true so much, in the ways that we talk about history and lie about history, and the ways that we distribute power and resources, to go somewhere else and be looking at that and just to see what a farce it is, and to see, in my country, we die younger than we need to. It's the richest country on earth, but we don't have healthcare, and we don't have social services. We don't take care of each other. And so, young and dying in the Occident supreme was just kind of this, it's kind of me like sardonically, sadly laughing at the kind of, sad state of this gleaming, like in so many ways, beautiful country full of all these resources, but also full of all these people who are dying for all these reasons that they don't need to be dying for. And that's to include the people who this country abuses in the way that we were and are continuing to abuse people like asylum seekers and immigrants.
Wow. I mean, that's really intense. And I mean, it's deep, I mean, what a title, you can tell that you've been thinking about this since it's happened, really.
Yeah, definitely.
Is it really important to you? Or let me rephrase that. Was it always really important to you to talk about things you saw going on around you and in the world in your music? Or did that come as you found those new awarenesses from traveling?
I think it was always important in one way or another. Like I said before, I'm a pretty shy person, pretty quiet, reserved person. So whenever I'm on stage, I feel very conscious of how much space I'm taking up, because in my normal life, and I also have a really loud singing voice. So like in my normal life, for me to go into a room full of people and then just sing at the top of my lungs I'd be mortified to do that. And there's a piece of that still there, even when I'm on stage. And so actually a lot of times when I come off stage, I have this really bad anxiety. Like, why was I so loud? Why was I talking so much for the last hour? Like, why was I taking up so much space? And so when I'm on stage, I feel really conscious of the fact that, there's nothing about me that's so special that I deserve to be the only one who gets to talk when I'm in a room full of people. But if I am going to be the only one that does talk, if I am going to be the center of attention, I feel like it's my duty to use that time to say something besides look at me. Don't you love me so much? I'm so talented. Like, right. I need to actually say something.
Express something more.
Right. Music is an expressive art form. The point of it is to convey ideas and emotions. And so I want to convey some actual meaning and hopefully some things that actually help improve the world. I think if you're getting up on stage and demanding everybody else be quiet while you talk and then not saying anything, I think you're really doing yourself and the rest of humanity a big disservice.
That's a really good point, though. It's true, because I see a lot of people, it seems like that's just the goal, is just the getting on stage. And then once that's accomplished, those people don't really seem to care. I've seen it in stand-up. I've seen it in music. It's a fascinating thing. I mean, what are your thoughts on, music culture being dominated so much by, a lot of that? Like, for example, the headline in popular music right now is Lil Uzi getting the $24 million diamond on his head. And I'm like, there's people starving. This is news. I mean, how does that feel for you as an artist who does bring meaning to the table?
Yeah, I really try not to judge people too harshly, because people are shaped by their environment. People are shaped by a really messed up society. And so I try not to think too much about it on the individual level, but on the systemic level, what I will say, and I'm not talking about Uzi or anybody else in particular, but I do think that given the fact that the music industry is dominated by a couple, like 2 or 3 really massive corporations, just immense billions of dollars. Corporations. I think it would be naive to think that they aren't interested in serving the interests of the rich people who run them. And I think it's more advantageous for the people who already have all that money to give a little bit of that money to just a handful of us poor people. Like, because I know Uzi was born poor. I know, like, so many of these people who are, multi-millionaires now as a result of music were born poor. But the reality is, like, somebody else writes their check. And that's the person I think we need to be worried about, because those people are invested in the messages being take drugs, buy alcohol, like buy products, like all this stuff will make you happy. Don't think too much about how messed up the society is. Don't think too much about
be extremely sexual all the time.
Right. Don't think too much about joining together and pursuing your common interests. So like the place I locate my kind of antipathy toward that stuff is toward the powerful people who kind of run that system, because I don't think it's by accident. I think that they're very intentionally feeding us certain kinds of messages to keep us docile, or to keep us like at each other's throats instead of like collectively. Because the fact is that just and I'll speak to the United States because I know more about the United States than I do about Canada, but I know enough about Canada to know it's also true there. The great majority of us have more in common than we have different. Like, we're just regular people barely scraping by, one big tragedy away from living on the street. And the only reason that we keep living that way is because we don't all get together and say, why don't we just take some of what they've got? And you know, history has shown you can only push people so far before that happens. So I'm definitely not somebody who's in favor of violence, and I want that transition to a more equitable society to be peaceful.
Right.
But I think that the kind of vapidness that you're pointing at in some of these messages is part and parcel to just an overall like pop culture landscape that really pushes nothing at you. It's just about keeping you numb, keeping you like, this is just going to fill some time so that you can't think about how messed up everything is, you know?
What a great point. It's so bizarre too. I mean, when you really start thinking about it, there's very few themes being discussed in popular music. And I think it is important to look at, there's very few people running it. So it's like that definitely goes hand in hand. There's an agenda and it's not a big one. I mean, you know, Mobley, I do want to know, what would you say is the biggest misconception that you encounter personally about being in the music business, being a professional musician, like about how people come at you, so to speak?
I think it's related, actually. I think it's related to the last thing we were talking about. The biggest misconception that I get is that I'm in the music industry because I want to be famous. Like people always either like say that they wish for that for me, and that's really nice, and I appreciate it. Because the problem is, like, being able to make a living in the music industry is pretty directly tied to your level of fame. So I appreciate that, but then also, like, you know, people. It's hard to describe succinctly, but just as a result of, you know, hundreds and hundreds of interactions with people, it becomes clear that they think that fame is what's motivating me.
Right.
In actuality, I really have no desire to be famous. I hope that I never am famous. I would like to be like known for my work. I would like for my work to be sustainable and popular, but to be personally famous sounds like a nightmare. And I wish that I talk a lot about systems and structures and societies, but I wish that we lived in society where there was a social role for people who just want to make art and make a decent living at it, but aren't interested in being like on TMZ or any of those things. 'Cause, you know, I just want a sustainable living. I want to get my message out to as many people as I can. But I just want to, you know, I want to be able to make a good living and have security into the future from making my art. And beyond that, like, all the rest of it is that's just the game you have to play. Like, but I think it's a big misconception. I certainly, there are lots of people who are in the music industry who want to be famous, but I've also known so many people who, you know, are really shy, really introverted, really private, but are also just, they have this thing inside them where it's like, I have to do this. I have to make music. I have to play this game. and I think musicians would be a lot more happy, but I also think listeners would be a lot more happy if we were able to just kind of shed this obsession with celebrity and celebrity culture. And like, mass media has only existed for not even a couple hundred years, really. It used to be, you would just play music for the people who were around you, and that was it.
Play it out a window.
Right. Or you would go as far as you could get on a horse, and that was your audience. And there's something cool about that. There's something cool about like being able to speak to a really specific group of people and make art that is specific to that context. Now, obviously, like I said, Star Wars is doing a thing for me emotionally that is only achievable because it's been seen by billions of people. And I love that. But I wish we had space for both. I really wish we had space for both.
There's a place for both, I mean, and I some of the happiest people I've ever met are comedians who, probably 1 out of 20 people might have heard of, but they work every night and they make a good living. And, I've met musicians like that. And I think that's really important, to be telling people, because I think it's underrated just how valuable that is.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a tough thing. So, I mean, definitely excited for the EP. There's so much coming out. Is there anything else that you wanted to touch on? I know there's the virtual tour that's coming up, starting on February 25th.
Yeah, so we've got that, which is going to be, I partnered with a series of venues around the country that I would have been playing under ordinary circumstances. And they're going to be presenting these shows that I'm filming all around the Austin and like Central Texas area. And they're going to be a bunch of other musicians who are featured on that I'm really excited about. We haven't announced those yet, but we will soon. And all the proceeds from that are actually going to charity. They're going to the venues directly to help them during these difficult times, but also to a relief organization here called the Dawa Fund that provides direct aid to people of color who work in healthcare, the arts, and the service industry. So I'm very excited about that. And then the other thing that's on the way, the first 2 songs that I've put out from the record are called James Crow and Nobody's Favorite, and they each have a video, and each of those videos are actually part of a larger film. So a couple weeks after the record comes out, we'll be releasing the full film. So like you said, a bunch of stuff on the way.
So exciting. And, I definitely urge everybody to go check out the record when it drops. The release date as of now is February 19th. And honestly, everybody, it's very fresh. Just great stuff. And Mobley, I thank you for taking the time and chatting with me. There's one more thing I wanted to touch on in terms of Austin, and you're talking about Texas. Is it very open right now within sort of the restrictions of being safe? Like, is there a lot of opportunity to do shows and do things like this in general right now in Austin?
I have not played any shows since the pandemic started because it just doesn't feel like a responsible thing to do. There are some, but most people are refraining because we are slowly getting a little bit better, but we're in stage 5 here, the highest stage, and as of a couple weeks ago, our our ICU was full. So there's not too much going on in that respect, but people are being creative, doing things carefully. Like I said, we have a little pot of people who gets tested and stay safe, and we've been able to. It's just 4 of us, and we've been able to safely and in a socially distant way film these things. I also did a thing earlier last year where I performed what I called curbside concerts. So I had a contest for fans and randomly selected a bunch of people, and then I drove to their house and played a song to them from the street in front of their house.
That's so cool.
Just trying to be creative and come up with new ways of connecting with people in this weird circumstance.
Wow, man. Well, listen, I really value everything you're doing and the message that you're sending. And, it's about more than fame. It's about more than fluff. It's about passion and, dedication. I appreciate you very much for that.
Thank you. I really appreciated talking to you today.
Definitely. Mobley, thank you so much.